Some people believe life changes with a phone call. Others say it happens because of one conversation. For me, everything changed because of an envelope. A plain white envelope, heavy enough to feel important, official enough to command attention, ordinary enough that I almost left it sitting in the mailbox until evening. Looking back now, I think about that moment often, how differently life might have unfolded if rain had started falling, if I'd been running late from the grocery store, if I'd decided the mail could wait another day. But life rarely announces the moments that matter most. It simply places them in your hands and waits. Marcus and I had been married for 22 years, together for nearly 25. By then, our marriage had settled into a comfortable rhythm. Not perfect, real. We still argued over silly things, whether the thermostat stayed too low, who forgot to replace the empty milk carton, whether he watched television too loudly after 10 o'clock. The little disagreements that somehow become signs of home. Marcus always laughed first. He hated staying angry. Even after all those years, he still reached for my hand whenever we walked through parking lots, still kissed my forehead before leaving for work, still brought me tulips instead of roses because he remembered tulips had been my mother's favorite flowers. Love changes over time. It becomes quieter, less dramatic, more dependable. Or at least that's what I believed. That Friday afternoon started like dozens before it. The June sun pressed warmly against the windshield as I pulled into our driveway. My trunk held grocery bags filled with vegetables, chicken, fresh peaches, and the ingredients for Marcus's favorite peach cobbler. He'd worked especially hard that week. I wanted to surprise him. As I climbed the porch steps, I noticed the mailbox was overflowing. Catalogs, utility bills, advertisements, and one large envelope, cream-colored, thicker than everything else. Across the front appeared an elegant university seal embossed in dark blue. For a moment, I smiled. Our nephew, Caleb, had applied to several prestigious universities. Everyone in the family waited anxiously for acceptance letters. "Oh, Lord," I whispered, "I hope he got in." Without really thinking, I tucked the envelope beneath my arm while carrying groceries inside. The house smelled faintly of lemon furniture polish. Sunlight poured through the kitchen windows. I set the grocery bags on the counter, then returned to the envelope. Only then did I notice something strange. The name. Not Caleb, not my sister, not anyone I expected. The envelope was addressed to Marcus D. Reynolds. I frowned. Marcus? Maybe the university wanted alumni donations. Maybe it was a fundraising campaign. He'd never attended that school, but universities mailed advertisements constantly. I turned it over. The envelope had already come unsealed, probably loosened by the summer heat. The flap lifted effortlessly beneath my thumb. I hesitated for a moment, then reasoned exactly as countless married couples probably would. Marcus and I opened each other's mail all the time. Electric bills, insurance documents, bank statements. There had never been rules about it. So I slid the papers free. The first page carried the university crest across the top. Beautiful, heavy stationery. I smiled again. Definitely official. Then I began reading. Dear Marcus D. Reynolds, we are pleased to inform you that your son, Jordan Williams, has been awarded a full academic scholarship. I stopped. My eyes remained fixed on the words, certain I had skipped a line. I started again, more slowly. We are pleased to inform you, your son, Jordan Williams. No, that couldn't be right. Marcus didn't have a son. We never had children together. He never mentioned having children before our marriage. I knew his entire family, his parents, his brother, his cousins. There had never been a Jordan. Maybe the letter was placed inside the wrong envelope. That happens sometimes. I searched for another name, another explanation. There wasn't one. Everything matched. Marcus's address, Marcus's full legal name, the scholarship office, Jordan Williams. My breathing slowed, not because I felt calm, because my mind refused to move forward. Instead, it circled the same impossible question: who is Jordan? I sat at the kitchen table, the letter trembling gently in my hands. The scholarship itself sounded remarkable: full tuition, academic honors, leadership award, national recognition. Someone had clearly accomplished something extraordinary. Someone Marcus apparently called his son. I whispered the words aloud. My son. Hearing them made the room feel unfamiliar, almost foreign. I stood, walked to the refrigerator, poured myself a glass of water, drank half of it without tasting anything, then returned to the table. Surely there had to be another explanation. A godson, a foster child, a mentorship program. Maybe Marcus sponsored a student. He volunteered with youth organizations occasionally. Maybe son meant something symbolic. I searched every page. No. The letter referenced biological family information submitted during the scholarship application, emergency contacts, parent acknowledgement, family records. Everything pointed toward one unavoidable truth: Jordan Williams existed, and according to one of the country's most respected universities, Marcus was his father. I looked toward the clock, 5:12 p.m. Marcus usually came home around 6. 48 minutes. 48 minutes suddenly felt impossibly long. I folded the letter carefully, slid it back into the envelope, placed it neatly in the center of the kitchen table. Then I began preparing dinner, not because I was hungry, because chopping vegetables gave my shaking hands something to do. The knife struck the cutting board rhythmically. Carrots, celery, onions, over and over. Questions echoed louder than the knife. Who was Jordan? How old was he? How could Marcus have a son I never heard about? Why had no one in his family ever mentioned him? And perhaps the hardest question of all, if Marcus had hidden something this enormous, what else had I never known? At exactly 6:03 p.m., I heard his car pull into our driveway. His familiar footsteps crossed the porch. His keys jingled against the front door. Then Marcus walked inside carrying a bouquet of yellow tulips. He smiled the moment he saw me. Thought these reminded me of... His words stopped. His eyes dropped to the cream-colored university envelope resting on the kitchen table. The color drained from his face so quickly, he answered all my questions before saying a single word.
I had been married to Marcus long enough to recognize every expression on his face. His smile when he was genuinely happy, the slight crease between his eyebrows when he was worried about work, the playful grin that always appeared before one of his terrible jokes, the quiet sadness that settled over him every October after his father passed away. For 22 years, I believed there wasn't a single expression I couldn't understand. Until that evening. The moment Marcus saw the envelope, his face didn't simply change, it collapsed. The smile disappeared first. Then the color drained from his skin. His shoulders stiffened. Even the bouquet of yellow tulips slipped slightly in his hand. It lasted perhaps 3 seconds, maybe 4. Then the familiar Marcus returned, or at least he tried to. "You got the mail?" His voice sounded strangely careful, not frightened, not yet, careful. I did. I kept my own voice calm. I opened one of the envelopes. He glanced at the table, then at me, then back again. Silence settled between us. Not awkward, heavy. The kind of silence that arrives only when two people already know a conversation cannot be avoided. He slowly placed the tulips on the kitchen counter, didn't take off his jacket, didn't loosen his tie, didn't ask what smelled so good for dinner like he usually did. Instead, he stared at the envelope. Finally, he whispered, "You read it." It wasn't a question. I nodded. Yes. Another long silence. "I was going to tell you." The sentence escaped almost automatically, as though he had practiced it somewhere inside his mind. I looked at him, not angrily, not yet. When? He opened his mouth, closed it again, looked toward the window. I don't know. That answer hurt more than if he had lied, because it sounded honest, painfully honest. I've been trying to find the right time. I folded my arms. For how long? Marcus lowered his eyes. His next answer landed like a stone. Almost 20 years. 20 years. The number echoed inside my head. 20 Christmases, 20 anniversaries, 20 birthdays, 20 years of dinners together, vacations, family reunions, hospital visits, mortgage payments, every ordinary day that builds a marriage. And somehow, for 20 of those years, my husband carried another life I knew absolutely nothing about. I pulled out a chair, sat down slowly because suddenly my knees no longer trusted me. Marcus remained standing, almost as though he believed he didn't deserve to sit. Finally, I asked the question that refused to leave my mind. "Marcus?" His voice barely rose above a whisper. "Yes? When exactly?" I paused. "Were you planning to introduce me to our son?" His eyes filled completely, because for the first time that evening, he realized I hadn't called Jordan his son. I had called him our son.
The words surprised both of us. Our son. I hadn't planned to say them. They simply escaped. The moment they did, Marcus covered his face with both hands. Not dramatically, quietly, like a man who had spent years carrying something too heavy to keep holding. His shoulders began to shake. I had seen Marcus cry only 3 times before. The day we buried his father, the afternoon our elderly golden retriever Daisy had to be put to sleep, and once after a close friend died unexpectedly from a heart attack. Marcus wasn't a man who cried easily. Watching him break apart across the kitchen table should have made me angry. Instead, it made me tired, emotionally tired, because I suddenly realized something. For nearly 20 years, Marcus had been carrying 2 completely different lives. That kind of burden changes people. Not because it excuses what they do, because secrets never remain isolated. They seep into everything. The way you laugh, the way you sleep, the way you answer simple questions. Eventually, they become part of your personality. Marcus slowly lowered his hands. "I'm so sorry." The apology sounded sincere, painfully sincere. I know those words aren't enough. "No," I answered honestly. "They aren't." He nodded. I figured. For several minutes, neither of us spoke. Dinner sat untouched on the stove. The tulips remained wrapped in brown paper beside the sink. Outside, the evening light softened across the backyard. Everything ordinary suddenly felt extraordinary. Finally, I asked, "Tell me about Jordan." Marcus looked surprised. "I thought you'd ask why I lied." "I already know why." His eyebrows lifted slightly. "You were afraid." He looked down. "Yes." "You thought I'd leave." Another nod. "I was terrified." "I want to know about him." Marcus blinked. "You do?" I asked. For the first time since he'd come home, a tiny, uncertain smile appeared. Not happiness, relief. "He loves basketball. He always has. He played point guard all through high school." I listened quietly. "He reads constantly. History, political science, anything about civil rights." Marcus laughed softly through lingering tears. "He corrects my grammar sometimes." I couldn't help smiling. "He sounds brave." He is. Marcus reached into his wallet. His movements were slow, almost hesitant. He removed a small photograph. The edges were worn, as though he'd carried it for years. He slid it across the table. I looked down. A young man smiled back at me. Tall, lean, warm brown skin, short curly black hair, kind dark eyes. Something about his smile immediately caught my attention, not because it resembled Marcus, because it resembled mine. I frowned. That made no sense. Then I realized what I was actually seeing, the expression, not the features, the softness, the openness, the way he smiled with his entire face. Without thinking, I whispered, "He's handsome." Marcus's eyes immediately filled again. "He'll be happy you said that." I looked up. "You've talked about me?" He nodded. "Since the beginning." "What did you tell him?" "The truth." I waited. "Mostly." The words settled awkwardly between us. "Mostly?" Marcus sighed. "I told him I married the love of my life." I said nothing. "I told him you were kind, patient, the strongest woman I'd ever known." Another pause. "I also told him," his voice weakened, "that I hadn't yet found the courage to tell you about him." I stared at the photograph. 19 years old, a full scholarship, a future waiting in front of him. And somehow, my life had intersected with his without either of us knowing. Has he ever wanted to meet me? Marcus looked genuinely surprised. "Every birthday." I blinked. "What?" "Every birthday," he asked. Marcus smiled sadly. "Do you think she'll like me?" The question hit me harder than anything else that evening. Not because Jordan asked it, because he believed there was a chance I wouldn't. A 19-year-old young man wondering whether the woman he'd never met would accept him. I felt tears sting my eyes for the first time, not because Marcus had lied, because Jordan had paid for that lie too. He thought I hated him? No. Marcus shook his head quickly. He thought maybe, he searched for the right words, maybe you wouldn't want another reminder of my past. I looked toward the photograph again. There wasn't anything threatening about the young man smiling back at me. Only possibility, only family, only years we could never recover. I stood quietly, walked to the refrigerator, removed the peach cobbler I'd baked that afternoon, placed it on the counter. Marcus watched me, confused. "What are you doing?" "I made your favorite dessert." He knew. "I also made enough for 4 people." He frowned. "I always do." I looked directly into his eyes. "You know why?" He slowly shook his head. "Because every Sunday I secretly hoped someone unexpected might stop by." He looked confused. "My nieces, a neighbor, one of your cousins. I've always believed a full table is better than an empty one." I took a slow breath, then smiled sadly. "It seems," I looked down at Jordan's photograph once more, "I've been setting a place for him without even knowing it." Marcus covered his mouth, unable to speak. The room fell silent again. Then something occurred to me, something important. "Marcus?" "Yes?" "Does Jordan know today happened?" He frowned. "What do you mean?" "The scholarship letter, the envelope, me finding out." Marcus reached instinctively for his phone. His expression changed immediately. There were 6 missed calls, 3 voicemail notifications, and 1 unread text message. The message had arrived less than 15 minutes earlier. It was from Jordan. Marcus opened it, read silently, then handed it to me. My eyes moved slowly across the screen. "Dad, the university accidentally mailed my scholarship letter to your home instead of Mom's address. I'm really sorry. Did your wife find out?" I read Jordan's message twice, then a third time. Each time, a different part of it settled inside my heart. Not the apology, not the scholarship, not even the mistake. One word: Dad. Such a simple word, 4 letters, yet it represented nearly 20 years of birthday cakes, basketball games, report cards, late-night phone calls, and father and son conversations I had never known existed. Marcus hadn't become a father that afternoon. He had been one for almost 2 decades. I had simply never been invited into that part of his life. I handed the phone back. Marcus looked as though he expected me to say something, anything. Instead, I asked quietly, "Does he know about me?" Marcus nodded. "He knows your name. He knows we're married. He knows you've never known about him." I frowned. "And he agreed to keep that secret?" Marcus looked down at the table. "No." That answer caught my attention. "What do you mean?" Marcus rubbed his forehead. "He argued with me." "When?" "The first time we met." I leaned back slightly. "He said he didn't want to build a relationship that depended on lying." The words sounded surprisingly mature. "He was 16?" Marcus nodded. "He told me," Marcus swallowed hard, "that secrets always become someone else's pain." For a long moment, neither of us spoke. A 16-year-old boy had understood something that 2 grown adults had ignored. Eventually, every hidden truth belongs to someone else. Marcus continued quietly. "I promised him I'd tell you." "When?" "That year." "And?" "I couldn't." Another promise postponed, another year lost. He asked again the following Christmas. Marcus's voice grew softer. "I said I needed more time." "And after that?" "Every birthday, every Thanksgiving, every graduation." He kept asking. The room felt impossibly still. Jordan hadn't wanted to replace me. He hadn't wanted to remain hidden. He had simply wanted honesty, the same thing I wanted, the same thing Marcus couldn't bring himself to give either of us. I looked at the scholarship letter again. The university seal suddenly seemed less important than the young man behind it. "What is he studying?" Marcus smiled faintly. "Political science. He wants to become an attorney." I smiled beside myself. "Really?" "He says he wants to help families." The sentence lingered in the air. Help families. How ironic. The child born into secrecy wanted to spend his life helping people find justice. "What kind of student is he?" Marcus's face brightened in a way I hadn't seen all evening. "The kind who finishes homework before anyone asks, the kind who tutors other students, the kind who thanks teachers at graduation. He volunteers at a community literacy program every Saturday." I listened carefully. Every description painted the picture of someone thoughtful, kind, disciplined. The scholarship suddenly made perfect sense. Marcus reached into his briefcase. "I should have shown you these years ago." He removed a worn blue folder. Its edges were soft from being handled so often. He opened it slowly. Inside were photographs, hundreds of them. Jordan at 7 years old holding a basketball almost as large as he was. Jordan missing his 2 front teeth. Jordan dressed for 8th grade graduation. Jordan wearing a tuxedo at prom. Jordan standing proudly beside science fair trophies. Jordan smiling beneath a high school graduation cap. Every photograph carried tiny handwritten dates in Marcus's careful handwriting. I turned each page slowly, not because I was judging them, because I was grieving them. Every picture represented a memory I could never get back. Every birthday candle, every Christmas morning, every first day of school. Not because I believed those moments should have belonged to me, because I would have wanted them to. I would have cheered at his basketball games, sent graduation gifts, helped bake birthday cakes, hung college acceptance letters on the refrigerator. Instead, I had spent 19 years not even knowing he existed. Marcus watched me quietly. "I never stopped thinking about telling you." I looked up. "I believe you." His eyes widened. "You do?" "I believe you wanted to." I paused. "I also believe wanting and doing aren't the same thing." He lowered his head. "No, they aren't." Around 8 o'clock, the front doorbell rang. Marcus frowned. "We aren't expecting anyone." Neither of us moved at first. Then the bell rang again, followed by a gentle knock. Marcus stood slowly, walked toward the front door. I remained in the kitchen, unable to hear the conversation clearly, only quiet voices, then silence. A moment later, Marcus appeared in the hallway. His expression had changed again, not fear this time, surprise. He looked at me carefully. "Angela?" "Yes, there are 2 people here." I stood. "Who?" Marcus hesitated, then answered softly, "Lisa." My heart skipped, and he took a slow breath. "Jordan." For 19 years, they had existed only in stories, photographs, and a scholarship letter. Now, they were standing on my front porch, waiting to meet the woman whose life had just changed forever. For one suspended moment, nobody moved. Marcus stood in the hallway. I stood beside the kitchen table. The scholarship letter remained exactly where I'd left it. It suddenly felt strange that a few sheets of paper had brought 4 lives to the same front porch. I looked at Marcus. "You invited them?" He shook his head immediately. "No, they came on their own." His voice sounded as surprised as he looked. "I didn't know they were coming." The silence stretched between us. Then another soft knock echoed through the house. Not impatient, not demanding, almost hesitant, as though the people outside were giving us every opportunity to decide whether this meeting should happen at all. I took a slow breath. "What do you want to do?" Marcus searched my face. "I don't know." It was probably the most honest answer he'd given all evening. For 20 years, he had controlled every meeting, every conversation, every introduction. Now, life had taken the decision away from him. I looked toward the front door, then back at the scholarship letter. Finally, I said quietly, "I think they've waited long enough." Marcus nodded. His hand trembled slightly as he reached for the doorknob. When the door opened, time seemed to slow. A woman stood on the porch. She looked to be around my age, maybe a year younger. Warm brown skin, shoulder-length dark curls touched with a few strands of silver, simple blue blouse, dark slacks. No elaborate makeup, no dramatic entrance. She looked nervous. Beside her stood a young man almost 6 feet tall, slim shoulders, dark brown eyes, a navy polo shirt, khaki pants. One hand held the strap of a worn backpack. The other rested awkwardly at his side. Neither of them smiled. Neither looked angry. They simply looked frightened. Marcus spoke first. "Lisa." She nodded once. "Marcus." Then her eyes shifted toward me. There was no hostility there, only regret. "You must be Angela." I stepped forward. "Yes." For a second, neither of us knew whether to shake hands. Eventually, she extended hers first. "I'm so sorry." Those were the first words she ever spoke to me. Not an explanation, not an excuse, an apology. I accepted her hand. It felt warm, unsteady. "You don't owe me an apology by yourself." My answer surprised even me, because the truth had become clear during the past 2 hours. No single person had created this situation alone. Jordan remained quietly beside his mother. Marcus looked at him, then at me. Finally, he said softly, "Angela." His voice cracked. "This is Jordan." The young man immediately stepped forward. He offered his hand, just as his mother had. "Ma'am." His voice was calm but nervous. "I'm Jordan." I looked at him for several long seconds. There he was, no longer a photograph, no longer a scholarship letter, a real young man standing on my porch. His eyes looked remarkably like Marcus's, but his smile, even though it was hesitant, carried a gentleness entirely his own. I shook his hand. "It is very nice to finally meet you." He swallowed hard. "I've wanted to meet you for a long time." Those words settled heavily inside me, not because they were dramatic, because they sounded genuine. Marcus quietly stepped aside. "Please," he gestured toward the living room. "Come in." Nobody rushed, nobody pretended everything was normal. Lisa entered first. Jordan followed. He looked around the house with quiet curiosity. Family photographs lined the hallway, vacation pictures, holiday gatherings. Marcus noticed where Jordan was looking. "I've always wanted to show you this place." Jordan smiled sadly. "I know." That simple answer revealed how many conversations had already taken place between father and son, conversations I had never heard. I led everyone into the living room. No one seemed certain where to sit. Eventually, Lisa chose the armchair nearest the window. Jordan remained on the edge of the sofa. Marcus sat in the chair opposite him. I stayed standing for another moment, then settled beside Jordan. He looked surprised. "So," I smiled gently, "I hear congratulations are in order." A faint blush crossed his face. "The scholarship?" "Yes." He laughed nervously. "I still can't believe it." "You earned it." He shrugged modestly. "I worked hard." Marcus smiled. "He worked harder than anyone I know." Jordan looked embarrassed. "Dad?" The word came naturally, without hesitation, without thinking. Marcus's eyes softened. For the first time that evening, I witnessed something beautiful. Not a secret, not a lie. Simply a father looking at his son with unmistakable pride. I realized then that my anger wasn't directed toward Jordan. It never had been. It wasn't even directed toward the relationship itself. Parents should love their children. Children deserve to know their parents. The tragedy wasn't that Marcus had become a father. The tragedy was that he believed he had to hide it. Lisa quietly cleared her throat. "I should explain." "You don't have to." "I want to." She folded her hands together. "When Marcus and I separated," her voice remained steady, "I discovered I was pregnant about 3 weeks later." She briefly looked toward Jordan. "I thought about calling. I really did." "What stopped you?" She smiled sadly. "Fear." The same word Marcus had used earlier. "I was 23. My father told me I could raise Jordan without reopening a relationship that had already ended. So I listened." She paused. "For years, I believed I made the right decision. And then, when Jordan turned 16, she reached over and gently squeezed her shoulder. He asked one question I couldn't answer anymore." Jordan finished the sentence quietly. "Who is my father?" The room fell silent. Lisa looked directly at me. "I contacted Marcus because Jordan deserved the truth." She paused. "I never imagined the truth would cost someone else 20 years. No one spoke. Finally, Jordan reached into his backpack. He actually brought something. He carefully removed a small photo album, blue leather, corners worn from years of use. He looked at me almost shyly. "I was hoping," he smiled nervously, "maybe you'd like to see the family scrapbook Dad made for me." The word caught my attention immediately. Not his scrapbook, not my scrapbook, the family scrapbook. And somehow, I already knew it contained photographs from a life that had quietly unfolded beside mine for nearly 2 decades.
Jordan held the scrapbook carefully. Not the way someone carries an old book, the way someone carries something that matters. Its navy blue leather cover showed signs of being opened hundreds of times. The corners were worn. The binding had softened with age. Marcus stared at it in surprise. "I haven't seen that in years." Jordan smiled faintly. "I brought it to campus interviews." Marcus blinked. "You did?" Jordan nodded. It reminded me where I came from. Those words lingered in the room, not because they were dramatic, because they were sincere. Jordan slowly placed the scrapbook on the coffee table. He looked at me before opening it. If this is too much, I understand. The kindness in his voice caught me off guard. He wasn't demanding acceptance. He wasn't asking me to pretend 20 years hadn't happened. He was giving me permission to protect my own heart. That alone told me a great deal about the young man sitting beside me. I shook my head gently. No, I'd like to see it. He opened the first page. A tiny photograph had been carefully taped into the corner. Jordan as a newborn, wrapped in a pale blue blanket. Lisa looked exhausted but radiant. Across the bottom of the page, Marcus had written in neat black ink, "The first picture your dad ever received of you." My eyes moved slowly across the page. Marcus hadn't been there. Not for Jordan's birth, not for his first steps, not for his first words. Those moments had already passed before he even knew his son existed. The next page held another photograph. Jordan at 4 years old, standing proudly beside a finger-painted dinosaur. Another handwritten note. "Your mom said you insisted dinosaurs could wear sneakers." I smiled despite myself. Jordan laughed. "I really believed that." Lisa rolled her eyes affectionately. "He argued with his preschool teacher for a week." The room filled with the smallest hint of laughter, not forced, natural. For just a moment, the tension eased. Jordan turned another page. Basketball games, science fairs, volunteer projects, college visits. Marcus appeared in many of them, never at the center, usually standing quietly in the background, watching, supporting, listening. Not replacing Lisa, simply becoming the father he had missed the chance to be. Then Jordan stopped on one particular page. His smile faded. "I almost took this one out." I looked down. It showed Marcus sitting alone in a gymnasium. The basketball court behind him was empty. Only a handful of parents remained. The timestamp in the corner read 8:43 p.m. What happened? Jordan hesitated. "My championship game." Marcus looked down. "I missed it." Jordan shook his head gently. "No, you came." Marcus was confused. "The game ended before I got there." "I know." Jordan smiled sadly. "But you still drove 3 hours." I frowned. 3 hours? Marcus nodded. "I had a conference in Chicago." Jordan interrupted quietly. "No, you had dinner with Angela." Marcus was surprised. "You remember?" "I remember everything." Jordan turned toward me. "He called to say he couldn't come. He said he had promised you a special anniversary dinner." My heart skipped. I remembered that evening. It had been our 20th anniversary. Marcus surprised me with reservations at a little Italian restaurant overlooking the river. He seemed distracted throughout dinner. I kept asking whether work was bothering him. He insisted everything was fine. Now, I finally understood why. He hadn't been thinking about work. He had been wondering whether his son had won the biggest basketball game of his life. Jordan continued softly. "After dinner," he pointed to the photograph, "he drove all night anyway." Marcus smiled faintly. "I wanted to see you." The gym was empty. Jordan nodded, but the janitor let him in. I looked at Marcus. "You sat there?" He shrugged. "For about 15 minutes. I imagined what the game must have looked like." No one spoke. Then Jordan quietly reached into the back pocket of the scrapbook. He removed a folded piece of notebook paper. He handed it to me. The paper was faded from being unfolded so many times. Across the top, written in Marcus's handwriting, were the words, "To my son." I glanced at Marcus. "You wrote him letters." Marcus nodded. Sometimes saying things out loud felt harder. Jordan smiled. He wrote one almost after every big moment. First job, driver's license, graduation, college applications. I looked back at the letter in my hands. The first sentence blurred my vision with unexpected tears. Jordan, I'm late becoming your father, but I'll never stop trying to deserve the title. I closed my eyes, not because it wasn't beautiful, because it was painfully beautiful. Marcus had spent years learning how to become a father. At the same time, he had spent those same years hiding that fatherhood from the person who loved him most. I slowly folded the letter again. Then I looked at Jordan. Can I ask you something? Of course. I hesitated. If you wanted to meet me all these years, he nodded. What did you imagine I'd be like? Jordan smiled nervously, then answered with complete honesty. I hoped, he paused, you'd make peach cobbler. I blinked. What? He laughed softly. Dad talks about your peach cobbler all the time. I looked toward the kitchen. The peach cobbler I had baked that afternoon still sat untouched on the counter. Jordan followed my eyes, then smiled sheepishly. I've been hearing about it for 3 years. Another brief silence filled the room. Finally, without thinking, I stood up, walked into the kitchen, picked up the warm baking dish, and carried it into the living room. For the first time in nearly 20 years, there were enough people in the room to finish the whole cobbler together.
The smell of cinnamon and warm peaches filled the living room. For years, that recipe had belonged to Marcus and me. Every summer, every family cookout, every church picnic, every Thanksgiving, someone always asked whether I had brought Angela's peach cobbler. Now I placed it gently on the coffee table. 4 small dessert plates followed, 4 forks. Such an ordinary thing, serving dessert. Yet my hands trembled as though I were performing something much more important. Jordan watched quietly. You really don't have to. I know. I smiled. I want to. He looked at Marcus for a second, almost asking permission. Marcus simply nodded. I served Elisa first, then Jordan, then Marcus. The last plate belonged to me. No one spoke while we tasted the first bite. Finally, Jordan closed his eyes dramatically. Oh, I laughed. What? He pointed his fork toward Marcus. He wasn't exaggerating. Marcus smiled for what felt like the first genuine time all evening. I've told you. Jordan shook his head. No, you undersold it. Elisa laughed softly. I've never seen him compliment dessert this much. Jordan shrugged. I've waited 3 years. The room relaxed just a little. Not because everything had been forgiven, because kindness has a way of creating space where anger can finally breathe. After a few minutes, Jordan looked around the living room. His eyes stopped at a framed photograph sitting beside the fireplace. Marcus and I, taken during our 20th wedding anniversary. The same evening, Marcus had driven 3 hours afterward, hoping to reach an empty basketball gym. Jordan stood, walked closer. I've seen this picture. I frowned. You have? Marcus answered. I showed it to him. Jordan nodded. Dad carries this one in his wallet. I looked toward Marcus. He slowly reached into his wallet again. Between old receipts and business cards rested a slightly worn photograph, the same anniversary picture, edges softened from years of being handled. I couldn't remember the last time I'd seen it. You've carried this all these years? Marcus smiled faintly. It reminds me, he hesitated, of home. Those words stayed with me. Home. For years I assumed Marcus divided himself between 2 families. Now I wondered if he had actually spent years trying to convince himself they somehow belonged together. Jordan carefully returned the framed photograph to its place. I always wondered what your house looked like. His voice remained thoughtful. Dad talks about it. He does? Marcus looked embarrassed. Jordan grinned. The garden, the front porch, the blue kitchen, the peach tree. I laughed. The peach tree? Marcus rubbed the back of his neck. I might have mentioned it. Might? Jordan smiled. You told me every spring whether it bloomed early. Elisa laughed quietly. And every autumn, he talked about Angela's homemade jam. I looked at Marcus. You really talked about me that much? His answer came immediately. Every chance I got. I didn't know what to do with that information. A man who had hidden the existence of his son had apparently never hidden his wife from that son. The contradiction made my heart ache. Jordan walked slowly toward the bookshelf. Family albums lined one shelf, church directories, vacation scrapbooks, graduation programs from nieces and nephews. He noticed one empty space. What used to be there? Marcus smiled sadly. Our wedding album. I frowned. It's upstairs. Marcus nodded. I took it down a few weeks ago. Why? I was showing Jordan. I blinked. You showed him our wedding pictures? Jordan answered before Marcus could. I wanted to know where Dad's happiest memories came from. The sentence caught me completely off guard. Not jealousy, not resentment, simple curiosity. Marcus spoke quietly. I didn't want him to know only one part of my life. Jordan nodded. I wanted to know him, all of him. I suddenly realized something remarkable. Jordan had never been competing with me. He had been trying to understand me, trying to understand the woman who had shared most of his father's adult life, trying to understand why Marcus smiled differently whenever he mentioned home. Lisa broke the silence. I should probably tell you something. We all turned toward her. She folded her hands carefully. I never asked Marcus for money. The statement seemed unexpected. I had a good job. My parents helped when Jordan was little. When Marcus came back into Jordan's life, she looked toward Marcus. One rule. What rule? He could be a father. She paused, but not a secret provider. Marcus nodded slowly. I paid for basketball shoes, school trips, books, little things. Elisa smiled. But Jordan's tuition? She gently tapped the scholarship letter still resting on the coffee table. He earned that himself. Jordan looked embarrassed again. It wasn't just me. It never is. I smiled warmly. It takes people believing in you. Jordan looked at me for a few seconds, then quietly asked, Can I tell you something? Of course. I used to imagine, he laughed nervously, what you'd be like. What did you imagine? He thought for a moment. I figured you'd either hate me, his smile faded, or hug me. The room became silent, because beneath his gentle voice lived 3 years of uncertainty, 3 years of wondering whether he'd ever be accepted, whether the woman he'd heard about so often would reject him for simply existing. I stood, walked across the room, stopped directly in front of him. He looked up at me, confused. Without saying a single word, I wrapped my arms around him. He froze, only for a second, then hugged me back, very carefully, as though the moment might disappear. I closed my eyes, not because the past had suddenly healed. It hadn't. 20 lost years could never be returned. But standing there, holding the young man who had unknowingly been missing from our family, I realized something. The greatest thing Marcus had hidden wasn't another life. It was another person to love. And somehow, despite everything, love still found enough room to grow. Jordan hugged me so gently that it almost broke my heart, not because he was uncertain, because he was careful, careful not to assume, careful not to take more than I was ready to give. When we finally stepped apart, he smiled awkwardly. I've wanted to do that for a long time. I laughed softly through the tears gathering in my eyes. I wish you hadn't had to wait. The words escaped before I could think about them. No one spoke for several moments. Marcus looked down at the floor. Lisa quietly wiped her eyes. Some silences aren't uncomfortable. They're simply too full for words. Eventually, I looked at the clock. It was almost 10. The evening that had begun with a scholarship letter had somehow turned into the longest conversation of my marriage. So, I smiled gently. Tell me about college. Jordan's face brightened immediately. It was the expression of every young person eager to talk about the future. I'll be studying political science. I know. Marcus grinned. He talks about it non-stop. Jordan rolled his eyes. I do not. You absolutely do, Lisa laughed. He started reading Supreme Court opinions for fun. I blinked. For fun? Jordan shrugged sheepishly. I know that's weird. No, I smiled. It sounds like someone who knows exactly who he wants to become. He leaned forward. I want to work in family law. Marcus smiled proudly. I've heard. Jordan looked at me. I've seen how one decision can affect generations. The sentence settled quietly over all of us. He wasn't talking only about his own life. He was talking about ours. One decision, one secret, one postponed conversation, 20 years of consequences. I want to help people tell the truth sooner. No one answered. There wasn't anything to add. The wisdom in his words already filled the room. A little later, Lisa glanced at her watch. We should probably head home. Jordan nodded reluctantly. I don't want to overstay. I surprised myself by answering immediately. You aren't. He looked at me. Really? This house has been missing someone for a very long time. His eyes shimmered. Marcus quietly looked away. I think he was trying not to cry again. As Lisa gathered her purse, I noticed Jordan hesitating near the hallway. What is it? He pointed toward the staircase. Would it be all right? He stopped. I mean, only if you're comfortable. What? I've always wondered what Dad's home office looked like. I laughed. That's your first request? He smiled. He says that's where he keeps every important memory. Marcus groaned playfully. I told you too much. You definitely did. I led Jordan upstairs. Marcus and Lisa followed. The office sat at the end of the hallway. Marcus opened the door. Jordan stepped inside slowly. Bookshelves lined one wall. Family photographs covered another. Awards, certificates, travel souvenirs. Everything looked exactly as it always had. Then Jordan stopped in front of a framed photograph on the desk. It showed Marcus holding a little girl, my niece, Chloe. She couldn't have been more than 4 years old. Jordan smiled. Dad showed me this picture. I looked at Marcus. You really have shown him everything. Marcus nodded. I wanted him to know the people I loved. Jordan turned toward me. I know all your niece's names. I blinked. What? Chloe, Maya, Emily, Jasmine. He counted them on his fingers. I know your church choir won a regional competition. You collect cookbooks. You plant tomatoes every spring. You volunteer at the literacy center. I stared at Marcus. You told him all that? Marcus smiled sheepishly. I might talk about you a lot. Jordan laughed. He definitely talks about you a lot. I looked around the office. Everywhere I turned, I found little reminders of our life together. Then something unusual caught my attention. A small wooden box sat on the top shelf. I had never seen it before. What is that? Marcus froze for just a moment. Then he reached up carefully. It's... He smiled nervously. I guess there's no reason to hide it anymore. He handed me the box. It wasn't locked. Inside were dozens of greeting cards, birthday cards, Christmas cards, Mother's Day cards, every one addressed to me. None of them had ever been given. I looked at Marcus in confusion. What are these? He answered quietly. Jordan picked them. I looked back inside. The earliest card was dated 3 years earlier. Jordan explained softly. Every birthday, I'd ask Dad if this was the year he'd finally tell you. He paused. When he said maybe, I bought you a card anyway. My throat tightened. You bought me birthday cards? He nodded. I figured, he faltered. If I ever met you, I didn't want to arrive empty-handed. I opened the oldest card. Inside, written in careful handwriting, were the words, Dear Angela. I don't know you yet, but I hope someday you'll let me wish you happy birthday in person. The signature simply read, Dash Jordan. The next card said something different. Another birthday, another year, another hope, then another, and another. 3 years of unopened birthday wishes. 3 years of waiting for a conversation that never came. I looked at Marcus. Why didn't you give them to me? He closed his eyes. I always thought, he struggled for the words, I'd wait until the perfect moment. Jordan smiled sadly. There wasn't one. No, Marcus whispered. There wasn't. I carefully returned the cards to the box, then looked at Jordan. I smiled through fresh tears. I'd like to open them one birthday at a time. His face lit up. You mean that? I do, because those cards represented something far more valuable than paper. They represented 3 years of a young man refusing to give up hope. Hope that one day the family he imagined might finally become real. We stayed in Marcus's office much longer than any of us expected. No one seemed eager to leave, not because the room was especially comfortable, because it had quietly become the place where 20 years of hidden conversations were finally meeting the light. Jordan carefully placed the wooden box of birthday cards back on the shelf. I always wondered if you'd ever read them. I smiled. I wish I had read them 3 birthdays ago. He nodded thoughtfully. So do I. There was no bitterness in his voice, only sadness for time that couldn't be returned. Marcus leaned against the bookshelf. I've spent years imagining this meeting. I looked at him. What did you imagine? He laughed softly. Honestly, I imagined yelling. So did I, Lisa admitted with a small smile. I packed tissues. Jordan reached into his backpack and held up a travel-size package. I packed tissues too. That made all 4 of us laugh. It wasn't loud laughter. It wasn't carefree, but it was real. Sometimes laughter arrives because something is funny. Other times, it arrives because everyone has finally stopped pretending. When we returned downstairs, the kitchen still looked as though time had paused. The scholarship letter lay in the middle of the table. The bouquet of yellow tulips rested beside the sink. Dinner plates remained untouched. Jordan looked at the letter. It feels strange. What does? My scholarship. He smiled awkwardly. I thought today would be about college. Instead, he gestured around the room. It changed all our lives. It did, I answered quietly. But your scholarship still matters. He looked surprised. It matters a great deal. I picked up the letter. I hope you know how proud everyone must be. Lisa immediately smiled. I've never been prouder. Marcus nodded. I cried when he called. Jordan looked embarrassed. Dad exaggerates. Marcus laughed. No, I absolutely cried. I looked at Jordan. What was your reaction? He shrugged. I called my mom, then Dad, and then, he hesitated, I almost called you. The room became still again. You almost called me? He nodded. I had your phone number. I frowned. You did? Marcus answered. I gave it to him. When? Last year. I looked back at Jordan. Why didn't you call? He smiled sadly. Because it wasn't my place. The maturity in that answer humbled me. At 19 years old, he understood boundaries that many adults struggle to respect. Instead of forcing himself into my life, he waited, patiently, respectfully, trusting Marcus to do what Marcus kept postponing. I poured fresh coffee for everyone. No one refused. The evening had become one of those rare conversations that couldn't be rushed. As we sat around the kitchen table, Jordan glanced toward the refrigerator. Dozens of family photographs covered it. My nieces, church friends, vacation snapshots, recipe magnets. One empty space caught his attention. "You have room," I laughed. "I guess I do. For another picture." His words were so gentle that they barely sounded like a question. Without thinking, Marcus reached into his wallet again. This time, he removed the photograph of Jordan receiving his high school diploma. He handed it to me. I always wanted to put it there. I looked at the picture. Jordan stood proudly in his graduation gown. Lisa hugged him from one side. Marcus stood on the other. 3 people smiling, one place noticeably empty. I walked to the refrigerator, picked up a magnet shaped like a tiny peach, then attached the photograph. No ceremony, no speech, just one simple motion. When I turned around, Jordan was crying. Not dramatically, quietly. Tears rolled down his cheeks before he noticed them. "I'm sorry." He wiped his face quickly. "I didn't mean. You don't have to apologize." I handed him a napkin. He laughed softly. "I guess I packed tissues for everybody except myself." Lisa reached across the table and squeezed his hand. "I think you're allowed." Marcus stared at the photograph on the refrigerator. "I've dreamed about seeing that." His voice sounded distant, almost disbelieving. I looked at him carefully. "You could have." He nodded. "I know, if I'd simply told the truth." The sentence settled over all of us. There wasn't any argument. No one disagreed. Truth delayed is still truth, but delay always has a price. Around 11 o'clock, Lisa stood up. "We really should let you two rest." Jordan nodded. "I have orientation paperwork tomorrow." I smiled. "You'll do wonderfully." He laughed. "I hope so." As everyone walked toward the front door, I noticed Jordan slowing. He looked at the hallway wall. There hung a framed family portrait taken 5 years ago. Marcus, me, my nieces, my brother, my sister, everyone smiling together after a church picnic. Jordan studied it for a long moment. "I always wondered." He stopped. "What?" "What it felt like." I frowned. "What did?" "Having a big family." His voice remained calm, not jealous, just curious. "My mom and I were always enough." He smiled warmly toward Lisa. "We really were." But sometimes, he looked back at the photograph. I imagined what cousins felt like. Holiday dinners, family reunions, too many people talking at once. I felt my heart tighten, because he wasn't mourning what he'd lacked. He was imagining something he'd never experienced. I looked at Marcus, then back at Jordan. An idea appeared almost instantaneously. It felt so obvious that none of us had thought of it sooner. "Jordan?" "Yes?" "My sister is hosting our annual 4th of July cookout next weekend." He nodded politely. "I know." That surprised me. "You know?" Marcus smiled sheepishly. "I've talked about it every year." Of course he had. I laughed quietly, then looked directly at Jordan. "We usually have about 30 people." His eyes widened. 30? Sometimes more." He smiled nervously. "That sounds loud?" I laughed. "Very." I walked a little closer, then asked the question that changed his expression on his face completely. "Would you like to come?" Jordan stared at me. He didn't answer, not because he didn't want to, because I don't think he'd ever imagined he would hear those words. Finally, in a voice barely above a whisper, he asked, "Are you sure?" "Are you sure they'll save me a seat at the family table?" Jordan's question stayed with me long after the words left his mouth, not because it was complicated, because it wasn't. It was the kind of question only someone who had spent years standing outside a family could ask. Not, will they like me? Not, will I fit in? Simply, will there be a place for me? I smiled. There has always been a place. I paused. We just didn't know who it belonged to. Jordan lowered his head. I could see him trying very hard not to cry again. Lisa quietly slipped her arm through his. Marcus stood completely still. For perhaps the first time in 20 years, no one needed him to explain anything. The truth was finally speaking for itself. "We'd love to have you," I continued. "My sister makes enough food to feed an army." Jordan laughed through watery eyes. "Dad wasn't exaggerating about that either. He usually doesn't." Marcus raised an eyebrow. "I've been promoted from liar to reliable storyteller." I looked at him. "Let's not get carried away." Everyone laughed, even Marcus. It felt strange to laugh after a day like this, but healing often arrives in unexpected forms. Sometimes it's tears, sometimes it's silence, sometimes it's one shared joke that reminds everyone they're still capable of smiling. Before they left, I walked Jordan to the front porch. The evening air had cooled. Crickets filled the quiet neighborhood with their familiar song. He stood beside the steps, looking almost reluctant to leave. "Thank you." He said it so softly I almost missed it. "You've thanked me several times tonight." "I know." He smiled. "I just don't think I'll ever stop." I folded my arms. "You didn't do anything wrong, Jordan." "I know. But," he looked toward the driveway, "I always worried today would hurt you." I answered honestly, "It does." He nodded. "I figured." Then I added, "But the hurt comes from the years we lost." He looked at the porch floor for a moment. "I've thought about those years too." "What do you think about?" He smiled sadly. "I wonder what I'd call you." I blinked. "What?" "If we'd met when I was little." He laughed nervously. "I knew you wouldn't be my mom. I already had one." He glanced affectionately toward Lisa. "But," he shrugged, "I always wondered whether you'd let me call you Aunt Angela." The words caught me completely by surprise. Not Mom, not anything that replaced Lisa, just Aunt Angela. The title carried respect, warmth, belonging, without erasing anyone else. I smiled. I reached over and gently squeezed his shoulder. "I think I'd like that very much." His face lit up. "Really?" "Really." He laughed. "Then," he hesitated, "good night, Aunt Angela." I smiled so broadly my cheeks hurt. "Good night, Jordan." As Lisa and Jordan drove away, Marcus remained beside me on the porch. Neither of us spoke until the taillights disappeared around the corner. Finally, he whispered, "I don't deserve you." I looked at him. "No." He nodded slowly. "I know." We went back inside. The house felt different, not emptier, fuller, as though a missing piece had quietly found its place. Marcus gathered the coffee cups. I wrapped the remaining peach cobbler. Neither of us seemed eager to go to bed. Around midnight, Marcus sat across from me at the kitchen table. "Can I ask you something?" "I can." "Why weren't you angry with Jordan?" The question surprised me. I never had a reason to be. "But," "Marcus," I interrupted gently, "he didn't choose how he entered this world." "No." "He didn't ask you to hide him." Marcus looked down. "No. He actually asked you to tell me." "Yes." "So why would I punish him?" Marcus covered his eyes briefly. "I don't know. I've spent years imagining the worst." "I know." He lowered his hands. "I underestimated you." I smiled sadly. "You underestimated honesty." That sentence lingered between us, because it was true. Marcus hadn't hidden Jordan because he knew how I would react. He hidden Jordan because he feared a reaction he never gave me the opportunity to have. Fear had written a story that reality never confirmed. The following morning, I woke unusually early. Sunlight filtered through the curtains. For a few moments, I convinced myself the previous evening had been a dream. Then I walked into the kitchen. The scholarship letter still rested on the table. The framed graduation photograph still hung on the refrigerator beneath the little peach-shaped magnet. It had happened. All of it. My phone buzzed. A text message from an unfamiliar number. I already knew who it was. "Good morning, Aunt Angela." I smiled before opening it. Attached was a photograph. Jordan stood in front of the university admissions building, holding the scholarship certificate, beaming with pride. Beneath the picture, he had written, "First person I wanted to show this to today was you." I stared at the message for a long time, then replied with the truth. "I'm proud of you, Jordan, more than you know." 3 dots appeared almost immediately, then his response arrived. That might be the first time anyone besides Mom and Dad has ever said those words to me. I looked toward the refrigerator again at his graduation photograph. Then I quietly made myself another promise. By this time next year, Jordan would never again wonder whether he belonged in our family, because I intended to spend the rest of my life making sure he never had to ask where his seat at the table was again. The week passed more quickly than I expected. Every morning began with a message from Jordan. Nothing dramatic. Sometimes it was a photograph of the university campus. Sometimes a picture of the stack of books he planned to read before classes started. Once it was simply a sunrise outside his bedroom window. His caption made me smile. "Thought you'd appreciate this. Dad says you're always awake before everybody else." Marcus laughed when I showed him. "I may have mentioned that." "You've mentioned a lot." He smiled sheepishly. "I've had 20 years. The words carried sadness, but not the kind that paralyzes you, the kind that reminds you not to waste what time remains. Wednesday afternoon, I found myself standing in the baking aisle of the grocery store. I reached automatically for flour, brown sugar, vanilla. Then I paused beside a display of cookie cutters. One shaped like a graduation cap caught my attention. Without thinking, I placed it in the cart, not because I needed it, because I suddenly realized something. For 22 years, I had baked celebration desserts for everyone else in the family. Birthdays, baby showers, graduations, retirement parties. Now there was another young person whose milestones I wanted to celebrate. That thought made me unexpectedly happy. By Friday evening, our family group chat had become unusually active. My sister, Cynthia, was finalizing plans for the annual 4th of July cookout. Who was bringing potato salad, who remembered the folding chairs, who volunteered to grill, the usual chaos. I stared at my phone. My thumb hovered over the keyboard. Then I typed one simple sentence. "Marcus and I will be bringing one extra guest this year." Within seconds, replies flooded the screen. "Wonderful! Who is it? Friend from church? Neighbor? Do we need another table?" I smiled, then put the phone down. This wasn't news I wanted to deliver through text messages. Some conversations deserved faces. Saturday morning arrived warm and bright. Marcus loaded coolers into the car. I covered 2 peach cobblers with aluminum foil. One never seemed to be enough. Not for my family. As we climbed into the car, Marcus looked unusually nervous. "You okay?" He nodded. "I think so." "You don't sound convinced." He laughed quietly. "I've rehearsed this day in my head for 3 years." "So have I." He looked surprised. "You have?" "Since Tuesday." We drove mostly in comfortable silence. About halfway there, Marcus reached across the center console and took my hand. I know I don't deserve another chance. I looked out the window. Fields rolled past beneath a bright summer sky. "I don't know what the future looks like," I answered honestly, "but I do know one thing." "What?" "I don't want another secret in this marriage, ever." "You won't have one." His answer came without hesitation. "I promise." Promises. Such small words, yet they had shaped so much of our lives. Some had been kept, others postponed until they almost disappeared. This one felt different, not because it guaranteed perfection, because it was finally built on truth. When we arrived at Cynthia's house, laughter already drifted from the backyard. Children ran through sprinklers, someone had music playing, smoke curled from the barbecue grill, the familiar sounds of family. Jordan and Lisa weren't there yet. Marcus noticed me checking the driveway. They're coming separately. I nodded. I know. We carried food inside. Cynthia hugged me immediately. I've been waiting all morning for that cobbler. I laughed. You say that every year. Because it's true. Everything felt wonderfully ordinary until the doorbell rang. Conversation softened. Marcus looked at me. I smiled gently. Go answer it. He opened the front door. Jordan stood there holding a large bowl covered with plastic wrap. Lisa was carrying a bouquet of sunflowers. For one brief second, no one moved. Then Cynthia appeared beside Marcus. She looked from Jordan to Marcus, back to Jordan again. Confusion crossed her face. I walked forward, placed my hand gently on Jordan's shoulder, then smiled at everyone gathered in the foyer. I'd like you all to meet someone. The room grew completely silent. This is Jordan. I looked proudly at the young man beside me. He's Marcus's son. Gasps, surprised expressions, questions forming behind people's eyes. Before anyone could speak, I continued. And beginning today, I smiled at Jordan. He's finally part of this family. Silence. Then something happened that none of us expected. My 80-year-old Aunt Evelyn slowly walked across the room. She stopped directly in front of Jordan, looked up into his face, then smiled. Oh, child. She reached up and gently touched his cheek. I've been wondering when I'd finally get to meet you. The room froze. Marcus stared. So, I whispered, you knew too? Aunt Evelyn looked toward Marcus, then sighed deeply. I've known since he was born. I felt the air leave my lungs, not because another person had kept the secret, but because I suddenly realized there were still parts of this story I hadn't heard yet. The room became so quiet I could hear the ceiling fan turning overhead. Everyone looked at Aunt Evelyn. She stood calmly in the middle of the foyer, one hand still resting lightly on Jordan's shoulder. Jordan looked just as surprised as I was. You knew me? Aunt Evelyn smiled warmly. I knew about you, sweetheart. She reached into her purse and removed a neatly folded handkerchief. At 80 years old, Aunt Evelyn never went anywhere without one. I've never met you, but I've prayed for you. Jordan blinked. For me? Every Sunday. His eyes immediately filled with tears. I turned toward Marcus. You never told me she knew. Marcus shook his head. I honestly didn't know. That answer surprised everyone. And Evelyn nodded gently. He didn't. Now it was my turn to be confused. What do you mean? She motioned toward the living room. I think we've all stood in this hallway long enough. Within minutes, everyone settled into chairs, children wandered back outside to play, the music in the backyard continued quietly in the distance. Meanwhile, 3 generations sat together to finish a story that should have been told decades earlier. Aunt Evelyn folded her hands. Lisa came to see me. Lisa looked down. I was 23. She smiled sadly. I didn't know who else to ask. Aunt Evelyn nodded. She wasn't asking for permission. She was asking for advice. I looked from one woman to the other. You knew Lisa? Only once, Aunt Evelyn answered. She drove 3 hours to meet me. Lisa quietly continued. I wanted someone from Marcus's family to know. She paused. I couldn't imagine raising a child without at least one person on his father's side knowing he existed. Aunt Evelyn reached over and squeezed Lisa's hand. I promised her something that day. What? That if Marcus ever learned the truth, she smiled at Jordan, I would pray that love would be stronger than fear. The words settled over the room like sunlight. No one spoke. Finally, Marcus whispered, "I'm sorry." Aunt Evelyn looked directly at him. "I know. I've carried this for 20 years. I know. I hurt everyone. I know." She smiled gently. "But Marcus," her voice became firm, "today isn't about your failure. It's about what your family chooses to do with the truth." I looked around the room. My sister, my brother, my nieces, my cousins, everyone had fallen completely silent. Not one face showed anger toward Jordan, only curiosity, compassion, warmth. Cynthia stood first. She walked over to Jordan. "You like potato salad?" Jordan looked confused. "I do." "Good," she laughed. "I made enough for 12 people. She hugged him before he could answer. One by one, the rest of the family followed. My brother shook Jordan's hand, then pulled him into a hug. My nieces immediately began asking questions about college. My cousin Raymond invited him to watch football in the fall. Within 15 minutes, Jordan wasn't standing awkwardly in the corner anymore. He was laughing, holding a paper plate piled too high with barbecue, listening to old family stories, exactly as though he'd always belonged there. I stood quietly beneath the shade of the old oak tree in Cynthia's backyard, watching it all unfold. Marcus joined me. Neither of us spoke for several moments. Finally, he whispered, "This is what I was afraid of losing." I looked at him. "And because you were afraid, you almost lost it anyway." He nodded slowly. "I know. I spent 20 years protecting a marriage that never needed protection." The sentence struck me deeply because it was true. Marcus never gave me the opportunity to choose. He chose fear instead, and fear had stolen 20 years from every person standing in that backyard. Jordan walked over carrying 2 glasses of lemonade. He handed one to me. "Thought you might be thirsty." "Thank you." He looked toward the family gathered around the picnic tables. "They're loud." I laughed. "I warned you, they argue about everything." "They do," he smiled. "I think I like it." "So do I." He became quiet for a moment, then reached into his pocket. I almost forgot. He unfolded a small piece of paper. "My dorm move-in schedule." I looked it over. Orientation, campus tours, freshman welcome weekend, the beginning of an entirely new chapter. "I'd like to come." The words escaped before I had time to think. Jordan looked up. "You mean move-in day?" "I'd like to help carry boxes." His smile widened. "I'd really like that." "So would I." He hesitated. "Can I ask one more thing?" "You can always ask." He looked almost embarrassed. "The university has a family orientation breakfast." I waited. "They ask students to bring parents or family members." He looked down at the paper. "I already invited Mom and Dad." Then his eyes found mine again. "I was wondering," he smiled hopefully, "if Aunt Angela could come too." I didn't answer immediately. Instead, I hugged him. That seemed to answer everything. A few weeks later, the 4 of us stood together on the university campus. Students hurried across brick walkways carrying boxes and backpacks. Parents took photographs beneath the university sign. Jordan wore a bright smile that never seemed to leave his face. Someone from the admissions office approached us. "Congratulations," she smiled warmly. "You must be Jordan's family." Without hesitation, Jordan answered, "Yes." Then he introduced us. "This is my mom, Lisa." She smiled proudly. "This is my dad, Marcus." Marcus's eyes immediately filled with tears. Then Jordan turned toward me. His smile softened. "And this," he reached over and gently squeezed my hand, "is my Aunt Angela." No explanation, no awkward story, no apology, just family. As we walked across the campus together, I realized something beautiful. The college acceptance letter didn't expose a scandal, it delivered a miracle 20 years late. It introduced me to a young man who had never wanted to take anything away from my life. He only wanted a place within it. Sometimes people believe the greatest gifts come in perfect moments. I've learned something different. Sometimes the greatest gift arrives years late, folded inside an ordinary envelope addressed to the wrong person, that somehow delivered exactly when a family is finally ready to receive it. If you enjoyed this story, please like, subscribe, and share. And tell me in the comments, have you ever discovered a family truth that changed your life? I'd love to read your story.